I'm from Alabama. I'm from Montgomery, Alabama. And a few weeks ago, I had the extraordinary opportunity to go home. And it was, I kept using the word surreal, because it really was. It was a surreal opportunity to go and be in the presence of old friends and new friends, strangers, mentors, and to be in Montgomery, Alabama. You see, when my husband and I moved here, in a lot of ways, I found myself pretty quickly, people would ask me where I was from, and I would respond with those two words, Montgomery, Alabama, and there would be a range of response, anywhere from okay to recoil, like, you're from where? And so I almost learned to not be ashamed, but fearful to share where I was from. Spent most of my life there, grew up there, went to school there. I always loved Montgomery until I realized that maybe not everybody felt the same way. If you'll go to the next slide. This is, in case you don't know where Montgomery is, this is where Montgomery is. Pretty much right smack dab in the middle of Alabama, about 3 hours from the beach. Maybe that got somebody's attention. This is home. And so going home to speak at a conference at my alma mater was surreal. I basically got to speak in front of my version of your McNeese. My mentor, my major professor, was there in the audience. That was really, really cool. But for me, that trip was more than just this conference, because after the conference, I had the opportunity to go downtown and go to those places that I've been countless times before. And I don't know about you guys, but when I go back to those places, I find myself reliving pieces of this history or trying to reabsorb it as if I've never seen it before. These signs that you see here, the City of Montgomery, the City of Montgomery sign, these are all over the place. You can't go a block in downtown Montgomery without hitting another one, telling you of some significant event or some remarkable person, and sometimes even a tragic event that happened at that location. These signs are important. You can go ahead and flip the slide now. This one is, this is the sky view of Montgomery. Outside of that great big, beautiful but gaudy building, this is what you would have seen in the 50s and the 60s. This is the skyline of Montgomery. And that is the Capitol. Every time I go to Montgomery and go downtown, I go and walk up towards the Capitol as if for some moment I could capture a glimpse, an emotion, some remnant of what happened in that march from Selma to Montgomery. I want to talk to you a little bit about my time in Montgomery because I became incredibly reflective as I was there. I had read an article a couple years before about the efforts based on the Black Heritage Council and the Equal Justice Initiative as they were trying to put more of those signs up around Montgomery. You can go ahead and flip the slide. You see, in the 1850s, Montgomery was the 75th largest city in the country. 75th. That's nothing to sneeze at, but not massive. But they were the second largest population of slaves in the whole country. 75th largest in the country, second largest population of slaves. This leaves a devastating legacy. Just a few years later, when the Civil War started in 1861, there were more slave depots than there were churches and schools in Montgomery. How do you overcome a legacy like that? This is where things get interesting for me. A couple years ago, the Black Heritage Council and the Equal Justice Initiative, they worked to put 3 markers, these signs, around Montgomery. They said that these signs, these markers of where slave trade happened in Montgomery were important parts of history. As you might imagine, There's quite a few that had a problem with this. They were concerned about this. This is a hot-button issue. The mayor himself was very, very worried about this. He didn't want to reignite more controversy. He didn't want to remind Montgomery folks of their sordid and terrorist activity from the past. But the Black Heritage Council, they worked very hard, tirelessly for months, and said, this isn't about that. They said that if we want to understand the civil rights movement, we have to understand the Civil War, and we have to understand slavery. It's history. We have to appreciate what happened. We have to understand. We have to somehow try to educate and encourage an elevated consciousness about the events of that time. And the markers were a significant beginning to that conversation that we all need to have. The leader of the Black Heritage Council said that all people are shaped by the legacy of slavery. And talking about this is a challenge, but it's a necessity. You see, in the South, slavery is still an issue in litigation. We haven't decided yet if we can talk about it. I was sharing with my class this morning that this is a very uncomfortable conversation for me to have right here, right now. As many years as I've lived in the Midwest, it is still very uncomfortable. Growing up in Montgomery, you were taught there were things that you didn't say. I didn't even say the word black for years before I moved here because that was an incendiary word. It automatically somehow meant you were racist. This is the legacy of Montgomery. And I got to tell you, that's not what I want. That's not my home. The reason I'm talking to you about it is because there was a study done about the same time that the Black Heritage Council and the Equal Justice Initiative put these markers up around town that said that for many young Americans, the civil rights movement is this distant, far-off, shining moment in history that has no consequence to them. This is what they are learning, what they're absorbing. I take umbrage with this. If we refuse to talk about the civil rights movement, if we refuse to talk about the Civil War and slavery and the impact those things had on us, then are we not distorting history? Are we not saying that it's inconsequential, that it has no bearing? What about the voices that fought so hard? Are they silenced? I don't think so. I don't want that to happen. We have to embrace the past and learn from it. You guys have heard the quote, "Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it." I think there's a lot of value to that. We cannot allow the civil rights movement to fade from memory. We just can't. We can't be afraid to talk about these difficult issues like a slave market. Is it something to be proud of? Absolutely not. Is this my Montgomery? No. But is this history? Absolutely. If we don't recognize that, how close are we to repeating it? We have to appreciate the struggle that these people endured to overcome tyranny and oppression. Dr. King said, "The time is always right to do what is right." We have to remember these words. We have to better ourselves and better society. And to do that, we have to know about the past. On Wednesday nights, my husband and I have been going to a Bible study at the church that Dr. Kite's been leading, and he's been talking about Exodus. He's been talking about the Israelites leaving Egypt, and there was a verse that just really struck me as I've been ruminating about chapel and preparing for this. Exodus 14:13 says, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will have the deliverance the Lord will bring you today." Don't you think that's what so many of them were fighting for? Deliverance? Standing firm? How am I paying homage to their memory, if I'm whitewashing that history, if I'm turning it into a glorified legend or even a myth, if I'm not talking about it, who is? What are they saying? The day after Dr. King's birthday, my son's school, they talked quite a bit about Dr. King, and my son came home all over the house. I have a dream. It's really kind of, for a history professor, it was, that was crack for me. I was pretty pumped. I have a dream. He's all over the house yelling it. It was awesome. Beyond that, he actually knew, for me, the heart of Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. I was really impressed. He said, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, by the content of their character. You see, my son does not know color. He knows shades, but that's because people have taught him to speak that way. Before that point, if Corey Slaughter was here, he could tell you about the first time my son recognized color was with Corey, climbing all over him and suddenly asking him, why are you so dark? He didn't know. He didn't know. That is my son. My son sees people by their character. When you ask him to describe someone, he'll tell you what they ate for lunch or what game they like to play out on the playground. He is not going to describe their skin. Tell me that's not Dr. King's dream realized. By the content of their character. And if we're not talking about that history, if we're not talking about those dreams, what are they getting? The past month, we've spent Wednesdays sharing moments in Black history. You've seen in the cafeteria the information on the tables about entrepreneurs, musicians, politicians, and others of significance from Black history. Outside of the cafeteria, there's a great big old board with more of that stuff. For me, February is a celebration. But we can never forget where we've come from. It gives us that much more appreciation. My greatest fear is that we are going to somehow lose the history. We're going to be so busy trying to eliminate the bad parts that we lose where we came from. We can't. I'm begging you, we cannot do that. Otherwise, I can't be excited about the inventors of some of my favorite things like the hairbrush, the refrigerator, the cell phone, and thank the Lord, air conditioning are all from African American creators. Those are great things. They're amazing things. We can celebrate and we can learn and we can grow. We tend to not want to talk about the bad things. We don't want to talk about the Black Panthers, but the reality is the Black Panthers are known for their manifesto of change. Well, how did that come about? Well, their change, the way they put that into action, that's what we should be talking about. They're the ones responsible for getting free lunches for children who could not afford. They're the ones responsible for getting dental care for kids that could not afford. We don't talk about that. Or what about Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, the first institution of higher learning exclusively for African Americans? They paved the way for 104 other historically Black institutions across our country that give us the likes of Thurgood Marshall, Spike Lee, and Oprah Winfrey. It's important that we talk about these things because we live in the world that Dr. King dreamed of. Please, let's remember that. We need to learn from history. We can't move past it because then we may have to learn the same lesson over again. And folks, there's too many people, those that have gone before us, whose lives will have been in vain. Flip the slide for me if you don't mind. I got a little carried away there. I forgot I had pictures here. This is the Civil Rights Memorial in Montgomery. Beautiful, beautiful piece of artistry, and right next to it, it's a picture of Dr. King's home. I've talked about Dr. King's home. When I was there, I got to go back there, and that was a really cool experience for me. I went with the guy whose father is the one that dismantled the bomb. on his front porch. And when they're there, they still had, on the front porch, there's an indention where the first bomb did go off. They didn't cover it up. There's even a placard to tell you what that is. It's not just some divot in the cement. That's important. We must learn from this history. Flip the slide again. And then Dexter Avenue. This was new for me. Right there in the middle is, it's a crosswalk with footprints in it. And it's facing the Capitol. I stood in them. I'm so geeky, I know. But I stood in those footprints. Kind of got a charge from it. I loved it. It's a moment in history we cannot forget. But we do not have to relive history. We can learn from it. We can grow from it, and we can be better from it. And I pray that you will be a part of that movement as well. Thank you.